Here we have a balloon in a vacuum, and the balloon is expanding. Now we're told that a vacuum is nothing. So how can nothing produce a reaction, which is the balloon expanding? How can that occur? If a vacuum is nothing, why is the balloon doing anything? Yet we see the balloon expand and expand. It's filling the space. It's filling the vacant space of the vacuum. Do you understand that? It'll keep expanding until it takes the shape of the vacuum. Now we have water in a vacuum. The guy's going to turn on the vacuum pump. The vacuum pump is going to suck the air out of this chamber to turn it into a vacuum chamber. Again, if a vacuum is nothing, how can there be any reaction? You must have an action to have a reaction. So he turns it on, and the water's going to appear to bubble boil. You see that? How can this be? How can this be? How can there be any reaction unless there is an action? How can an action be achieved if the vacuum is nothing? What's going on here is suction. Suction, the production of a vacuum by the removal of air to force fluid or any matter or medium, the balloon, into a vacant space, so that water is attempting to fill the space. And that is the reason why there's a reaction. It is due to suction. The balloon expanded due to suction. Is that really so hard to understand? Here we have a rail tank. They're going to use a vacuum pump on an adjacent truck to suck the air out of this rail tank. And it's correctly titled Demonstrating the Power of a Vacuum. Not the power of outside pressure, but the power of a vacuum. And also titled appropriately Vacuum Implosion. Because that's what's really going on. And it is due to suction. The other truck, the vacuum pump, will suck the air out of this rail tank. And you got the rail tank. Picture my hand as a rail tank. And as the air is being sucked out, it will implode or collapse in on itself. It is not outside pressure. Now, there's the truck with the vacuum pump. It's sucking the air out. And let's see what happens. Did you see that? Now, isn't that convenient? It's just crushed in the middle where the most power of the suction is occurring. It's not crushed there or there, is it? It's not outside pressure just moving in on this area. It would have crushed the whole thing. To prove my point, if you still don't understand, while this was, before it was crushed, you could affix 100 empty aluminum soda cans to the outside of this rail tank, and after it implodes, not one of those cans would be damaged because there's nothing from outside moving in to crush this thing. Every can affixed to the outside of this rail tank would still be in perfect order. It would not be crushed. That's where they invent dynamic pressure. That would totally bypass the aluminum cans and just crush this thing. How convenient. What's really going on here? Let me show you. Yes, the dreaded definition of
suction.
The production of a vacuum by the removal of air in order to force fluid or matter, the balloon, into a vacant space or procure adhesion. The vacant space is the vacuum, okay?
Suction.
The production of a vacuum by the removal of air in order to force fluid or matter into a vacant space. So you get yourself an empty 2-liter plastic soda bottle and suck the air out of it. That's the same thing that's happening with the rail tank. The walls of that plastic soda bottle will collapse because you are sucking the air out. It is not the air pressure in your room crushing the soda bottle. It is you sucking the air out. When you stop sucking, it doesn't continue to collapse. It only collapses in concert with you sucking the air out. It's the same thing with the rail tank. Now, this is why they do not want you to understand that vacuums create suction. They suck because they want you to believe that the Earth in its entirety is surrounded by an infinite and expanding vacuum universe 90 billion light years across. And 1 light year is almost 6 trillion miles. To express the enormity of a trillion anything, 1 trillion seconds would take over 30,000 years to go by. Now imagine 1 trillion miles. Now imagine almost 6 trillion miles. Now imagine 90 plus billion light years. Each light year almost 6 trillion miles. Do you know how enormous of a vacuum that would be? Vacuums create
suction.
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 The production of a vacuum. Of a vacuum, not outside pressure.
Suction.
The production of a vacuum by the removal of air in order to force fluid or matter to balloon into a vacant space or procure adhesion. That's why the balloon expanded, because it was filling the vacant space. It was being forced into the vacant space by
suction.
Let's hear it again.
Suction.
What's that?
Suction.
They don't want you to understand.
Suction.
And vacuums are something. They are not nothing. If they were nothing, they could not produce an action in order to get a reaction, i.e., the balloon expanding or the water appearing to bubble boil. It is due to suction. It is being pulled on. Okay? That rail tank it collapsed in on itself. It imploded due to suction by the outside truck vacuum pump sucking the air out in the same way that you would suck air out of an empty plastic 2-liter soda bottle. It's the same thing. Now I need you to understand. Try to understand that our cosmology is not what they taught us. If outer space were an infinite and expanding vacuum universe, 90 billion light years across, that vacuum would produce massive
suction.
That
suction
would relieve the Earth of all its gas, oxygen, and matter. It would all fill the space. The same way the balloon did. And that's that. And in reality, if science was honest, I would win a Nobel Prize for bringing this to their attention. But they know this to be true. They teach you a bogus cosmology. Knowledge is power. And that's how we are not ruled through knowledge. We are ruled through fear porn. Fear porn of aliens, asteroids, nuclear weapons, solar flares, and all manner of nonsense. And now, spy balloons clearly marked China, that there's no way could have floated 8,000 miles from China to us. It's all ridiculous. You people need to wake up. Nothing's fair. Everything's a lie. And start using logic. Don't just instantaneously believe, memorize, and regurgitate stuff like you've been doing.